All right, we are live. I'm going to wait a little bit until people join. A few join us today. Going to wait maybe a minute or two. And in the meantime, if there are some people already joining, let me know in the comment section if you can hear me loud and clear, if the microphone is working and the microphone and the camera are working. It would be very useful for me. Awesome. Okay, so we have people joining us. Awesome. So happy. I am so happy to be back. Happy New Year to all of you. I've been on a 2 week and a half kind of break. It was really good for me. I apologize for all of those people that were expecting regular videos during the holidays, but I really needed to take some time off to just recharge my batteries. And I hope that you did as well during the holidays. And I'm really wishing you a very good start of the year. I can only wish you the best. So I hope you can understand my little break. And it really just helped me refocus and feel like new again for this year. So today's stream is going to be about some of the events that occurred over the last few weeks. There's been so many. We'll talk about Ukraine stopping the flow of Russian gas to Europe, which is really important. Actually, that's one of the biggest wins at the start of this year for Ukraine. The interview with Lex Friedman, and Zelensky that I think was done this weekend. I'll talk about some more domestic local issues, the resignation of Trudeau. He's not fully resigned, so the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, has officially announced his resignation over the next few months. And also my outlook for 2025 for Ukraine, the Ukrainian war. So we're going to talk about a lot of things. And also I want to answer some of your questions. So I want to take the opportunity to answer your questions as well and have more interactions with you guys. That's one of my resolutions for this year as well, is that I want to be doing monthly streams, at least once a month. I want to be doing streams. I haven't done enough of them. Last year, I think I only did it twice. And I feel like I need more interactions with you guys. I think it's really awesome to be interactive, answering your questions, seeing your opinions live. And I wanted to be doing more of that. And perhaps in the future, have some guests coming through, maybe some events with other YouTubers. I don't know. We'll see about that. But at least I wanted to be doing more live streams and being more there with you. So you guys can let me know where you're coming from, where you're tuning in from. I'm always interested in seeing where you guys are watching me from. I can see that K-Bell is, I think it's the Australian flag. So thank you for tuning in. I see Darren. Hi, Chris. Hi, Darren. From Melbourne, Australia. Nice. I need to visit Australia, actually. I have some friends that went to Australia for like a few weeks. And the images that they got from the less traveled area, which is Western Australia. So Perth, they went from Perth all the way up to Albany and Esperance Bay. And the pictures from there are just amazing. The beaches, and it's a long flight from Canada, and I don't like flying for too long. So that's the only thing that's, stopping me from going there. But I absolutely want to visit Australia. It's in my must. Hi from faraway Kitchener, Ontario. Hi, Tom. Thank you for tuning in. I've been in Kitchener before, so thank you for tuning in. So again, as I've said today, I'll start a little bit about, I'll start my video or my live stream talking about the stop of Russian gas flow to Europe, which is extremely important. That's a huge win for Ukraine for the beginning of this year. And so what happened is that Ukraine announced that as of January 1st, there's not going to be any more flow of Russian gas to Europe. And this essentially severs European dependence on Russian gas. And that is so important. There is so many important things from a perspective of, Russian geopolitical play here that they've been doing for the last few decades with this Russian gas. So first of all, what is really important about that is that Most of Europe is now completely free of Russian gas. And this removes Russia's ability to blackmail countries in Europe from doing, from being independent and helping Ukraine. We've seen that there's only a few Russian allies that still are very dependent on Russian gas. I've talked about Transnistria and the crisis that's going to occur over the next few weeks because apparently you only have 1 month left of energy supply before they go back to the Stone Ages. And I'm not trying to make fun of the people living there, but they had decades to bet on the right society, and they bet on Russia. So you reap what you sow here. And I think that Ukraine gave more than enough time for countries to adjust, knowing the reality now that Russia invaded Ukraine, that Russia was using gas as an instrument, a geopolitical instrument against Europe and dependent nations. And so it was really important for Ukraine to turn off the taps and, of course, do it in the right way, right? Ukraine could have technically stopped the flow of gas as of day one of the war, the full scale war in February, but that would have certainly put many European nations against Ukraine because, of course, uh, people don't want to be freezing, and their support of Ukraine would definitely dwindle if they wouldn't have any energy security in their own country, like I don't know, France or Germany, etc. So Ukraine had to do it the right way, and thankfully now, year almost number 3, the taps have been almost completely turned off. Yes, Europe is still, I think, a little bit reliant on Russian gas, about 10 to 15%. They're still going to go through the Russian market for their energy security, but Europe understands very clearly now that they cannot rely on Russia. As they use this, they've weaponized energy to their benefit. So that is extremely, extremely important. Just going to read the comments here. Darren says that he's from Beltsville, Maryland, right? MD stands for Maryland. So thank you for tuning in from Maryland. It's a long flight from anywhere. It's a long flight to get to Ukraine for me. Yeah, that's the only thing about Australia is that, it sucks for the locals to fly anywhere. Like the only close countries are New Zealand, what Papua New Guinea, and Timor Leste. These are the only countries that are kind of close to Australia. So it must be very expensive to fly anywhere out of Australia and into Australia. Happy New Year to you, Slava Ukraini. Thank you, Anai. South Africa, more beautiful than Australia. I've not been to South Africa, so I cannot attest to that, but I'm sure that both countries are equally as beautiful. So that's kind of my little comment about the Russian gas. Another important thing here I wanted to talk about is the most important, Ukraine's independence from Russian gas. This is, the number one achievement for Ukraine is that finally, after decades of Russian meddling in Ukraine, the gas factor was always the biggest one that they were using against Ukraine. That whenever Ukraine would do an unpopular move that Putin wouldn't approve of, he would always threaten with, we'll either turn off the pipes or we'll double, triple the prices, right? Putting Ukraine in an energy crisis. And finally, now, Ukraine is not dependent on that anymore. If there's one thing we can learn from this is that nations can have to be self-sufficient in terms of their energy, or try to find as many partners as they can to be to not rely on just one country or one partner. And so that is extremely important, that Ukraine has finally freed itself from the dependence on Russian gas, on that cheap Russian gas, and it will force Ukraine to develop its own energy sector, which is extremely crucial. And on top of that, it's also going to have to find new reliable partners other than Gazprom, the massive Russian gas conglomerates, which is going to go bankrupt eventually, 100%, because they're losing so many profits and they've been running deficits in the last 2 years. Surfer Des, thank you, from Puerto Rico. Всіх вітаю, вітаю, і слава Україні. Thank you for tuning in. So that's kind of my little, my few points about the Russian gas. Now, I also want to talk about Zelensky's interview with Lex Friedman, which was uploaded, I believe, yesterday. I've watched a little bit of it. I didn't watch the entire interview, just because most of the stuff that Zelensky says, I already know what he's going to say. But I just wanted to kind of cover a little bit of some points as well about the interview, why it was important for Zelensky to do it, as much as Lex is definitely pro-Russian. Lex himself is a ex-Russian citizen who immigrated when he was young to the United States. So you already can tell that his position is definitely going to be more biased towards Russia, or more of a pro-Russian position, kind of the one that Elon Musk has, because he's very close with Elon Musk, and we know what kind of position Elon Musk has right now. So he's kind of a shapeshifter, right? And to Lex's credit, he made an interview with Zelensky, something that I was not expecting him to do. He flew to Kiev and he had this interview, this podcast with Zelensky, which was really important, in my opinion, to kind of um, allow an audience that is more, pro-Russian, the MAGA kind of supporters, the people that are less informed about Ukraine to watch his podcast, right? The Joe Rogans, type of people that kind of have a very, very superficial understanding of the war and have these sort of narratives of why can't Ukraine just make a deal with Russia, right? It's as easy as that, right? Just sit on the table and make a deal, for God's sake. Stop this war. Well, Ukraine tried to do that. And guess what? Russia lies and manipulates and is never acting in good faith. But they don't know that. And so it's important for Zelensky to talk about these points. Some of the questions that Lex gave to Zelensky were so pro-Russian, like, "Oh, I heard that uh, Russian-speaking Ukrainians were persecuted in Ukraine," type of thing. Like he's had a lot of questions where he was driving the narrative like Ukraine persecutes, Ukraine doesn't trust to essentially Ukraine and Russia are kind of one nation, that we should be all friends, and like very foolish statements that would probably be okay and acceptable in the beginning of 2022 when the war started, because many were so misinformed. But at this stage, we really see the lack of humanity that Russia has shown in the last 3 years in Ukraine. These narratives have to be completely erased. And it's thankfully Zelensky was able to keep a straight face during this interview and answer it as calmly as he could. And you could also see that Zelensky he knew which audience he was talking to. He said a lot of swear words, something that he wouldn't usually do if he was being interviewed by like a BBC journalist or CNN. And so he played really into that audience, that kind of ordinary American, ordinary person, wherever you are, that is misinformed. And you kind of understand kind of this emotionality that somebody can bring to an interview. So I think that was really important. He also hinted, Zelensky, about the possibility of running for second term for the next elections in Ukraine. Not surprised. Remains to be seen how successful that's going to be for Zelensky, because historically speaking, um, leaders of nations that go through wars don't often get reelected. You look at Winston Churchill as the best example of that. And I'm thinking, and I do lean towards a possibility of Zelensky not being reelected. The Ukrainians are more or less neutral right now, but there's less support for Zelensky by the Ukrainians, just because of internal politics that Zelensky is doing right now. But an important thing also that he talked about during the interview with Lex was about meeting with Trump. Now we're talking about Trump and the NATO members first before going to a negotiating table with Putin and having actual negotiations. He does not want a negotiation that's going to be, okay, let's all get together and talk. Like, it's clear that that's not going to work out because you're just showing all your cards to Putin right away. And so there needs to be an alignment between all NATO members and the United States as to what they're willing to compromise on, Ukraine and NATO, and what they're not willing to compromise on, and then provide that kind of package, that deal to Putin, and see what he has to say. Right, that's really important. I liked the fact that he talked about this, but otherwise, it's like coming to an interview completely unprepared, when you don't know what your partners want to say, what they believe in, what they don't believe in, and not being aligned. It's just a disaster, right? And you're just showcasing to Putin the divisions that may be. between the different Ukrainian allies. So I'm just going to go through the chat section before I continue. So, Vladimir Pinzovsky, Slava Ukraini, Heroim Slava. Apparently, Lex did a 2022 interview with Zelensky that was buried for propaganda reasons. Really? I need to look into it. I'm not sure. I didn't hear that, but I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised. Surfer Des. Well. I thought that Lex guy was an orc lover. Now I know. Yeah, well, he is, and he's mentioned it multiple times in his interviews that he is originally Russian that immigrated to the United States with his family. So it's hard to give up on those, roots. But not only that, but he has been very good friends with Elon Musk and other like Joe Rogan, the kind of people that we would call useful idiots. Ukraine must hold on. Russia is starting to run out of money and war machines. Absolutely. And that I'll talk about it at the end of my stream about my outlook for 2025 as well. And I don't trust Lex as far as I can throw a rock. Yeah, exactly. But to give credit to Lex, he had given the opportunity for Zelensky to have this interview. And he has, as a matter of fact, Lex also interviewed a Ukrainian historian, Serhiy Plokhy, if I remember his name correctly, a year or so ago. So he does give a platform to the pro-Ukrainian side. So I also have to give credit to Lex for doing that. He talks about having an open mind, open discussion. Well, we can see that he's doing that indeed. But of course, with his own bias. And I don't think that Zelensky managed to change Lex's mind or opinion. At least I'm not convinced about that. And another thing about the interview, which was really important, is that whatever Lex was trying to stir the conversation, which he was really good at, to a more pro-Russian public, Zelensky always brought the topics of the grief, the pain, the suffering that the Ukrainians have been living through to really humanize this conversation, to make the ordinary person understand how much difficulty Ukraine is going through. Like, imagine if this would happen to you. Imagine if a children's hospital would be bombed. Imagine if somebody just sleeping in their apartment building would die because a ballistic missile hits their building. Imagine all that. And I think that was also really important that he brought this conversation on a very emotional, humane level. Imagine if this would happen to you, because that's what the Ukrainians are living through day by day. Like, imagine if you would step out of your house worrying that perhaps there could be a ballistic missile that would hit you or a drone would kill you. That's the living reality of the people in Kherson on the right bank of the Dnieper River in Kherson City, where Russians are doing a safari of drones. Right, they're just hitting any civilians that they can with those FPV drones. Just today, they've hit a bus full of people in Kherson with an FPV drone. Right, and as a matter of fact, they've been saying, analysts and military experts have been saying that this is where the Russians are practicing their drone pilots on Kherson City, because they're not humans. They're animals. That's what the Russians are, that are, piloting these FPV drones against innocent civilians that just want to live their lives. So that was really important as well. So all this to say that I think, I know that Ukraine Matters is currently doing a live stream going minute by minute, second by second of the interview. I don't think, for me, I don't want to go through that minute by minute, but I think overall it was really important for Zelensky to reach out to a more MAGA, uninformed public, an audience that might not understand the Ukrainian war as well, and hit them with those important pro-Ukrainian narratives and opinions. And for that, kudos to Lex for allowing this interview to happen. So, and a very important thing I want to mention, the last little thing, is that Zelensky really wanted to showcase during that interview how different Ukraine and Russia are. This narrative of we're one nation, why can't we just get along? He really tried to showcase that Ukraine is a distinct nation. And that's why Ukraine is fighting for over 3 years for its independence, its full sovereignty from Russia. and it is not one nation. Russia stole Ukraine's culture. Russia stole Ukraine's identity, its history, and appropriated it for centuries. And Ukraine is also fighting for that, for its right to exist as a sovereign nation. And that was also really important because many in the United States that don't understand this kind of like, well, you're kind of the same thing, right? You Russian, Ukrainian are kind of the same language. You wear the same clothes. You kind of speak the same language. Why can't you make a deal? So all this to say that I'm very happy this interview happened, and it has over 2.5 million views as of right now, and more are going to be watching it, and more are going to understand the Ukrainian perspective. Even if some are not going to be convinced by Zelensky's words, it's still going to hit a few, and that is really meaningful. So I'm very happy that this interview occurred. Now, let me read some of your comments here. Jake Bro called him out on that 1x and got blocked. Yeah, tells you everything you need to know when you get blocked because you provide criticism to somebody. Effing Rogan, what a waste of air. Yeah, I mean, he is just part of that useful idiot gang. People that are not willing to put in the work to understand a conflict, to understand what are the factors, how did this war come to be. They just hear the kind of sound bites that are going on every day about what Putin said, about what Zelensky said, and that they form their ideas, their perspectives based on these sound bites and biased news, of course, that they read. They're kind of the Fox News type of crowd. Albert says, only good thing of this interview is the timing to get Ukraine in the spotlight on social media. Exactly right. It's that's the only good thing about the interview is the timing. And Zelensky is very good at that. He's very good at timing interviews. He's very good with PR. He's, after all, from show business, um, environment. So he knows how to pull off good good events, where he should say something, where he shouldn't say something. Like he's really good with that. Surfer 10 years. I'm not sure if you're referring to the war with Russia, but yeah, if we're talking about it's almost 11 years at this stage, because this war did not occur in February of 2022. It's been ongoing since February of 2014 when Russia illegally started its annexation of Crimea. And that's also really important because many still think that this war happened in 2022, whereas this has been ongoing for over a decade. And a decade of failure by the West to realize that band-aid solutions are not going to stop this conflict. The Minsk I and Minsk II agreements failed because they were not willing to commit to a true lasting peace in Ukraine. And that's what Zelensky talked about in his interview with Lex. How many Budapest Memorandum, Minsk I, Minsk II, all the negotiations prior to Russia's invasion, full-scale invasion in 2022, all of them failed because, again, the number one thing that the West fails to realize is that Russia will never act in good faith. There are liars, there are manipulators, and it's a society that's never been punished, for their wrongdoings. As a matter of fact, I shared with you guys a few weeks ago a great YouTube channel. It's Ukrainian who makes videos about different historical, inaccurate historical narratives being driven by Russia. I think his channel is Savage Sage, if I remember correctly. And I share with you one kind of picture in one of his videos about Johnny Harris. If you guys remember, he came out with, why Russia is fighting Ukraine is one of the reasons because NATO is expanding. Apparently, it's NATO's fault that Russia invaded Ukraine. But anyways, in that video that he's breaking down this Johnny Harris video, one thing that really struck me, and I really love that that picture that he put in is why basically Russian propaganda has been able to fool the West into thinking that they're somehow going to become democratic, that somehow Russian people are going to change, when in reality, they're not going to change. This is not just a Putin problem. This is a Russian society problem. They fully support and back this war in Ukraine. Whereas in the beginning of this full-scale invasion, many were saying that this is just Putin. As soon as you get rid of Putin, Russia is going to stop this war. I seriously doubt that. But Savage Sage essentially put down a very comprehensive list. Russia is a population that, one, never experienced true liberties in its history. 130 years prior, lived in serfdom. Not that far long ago, they were slaves, emancipated from a failed communist experiment, which of course is the same situation for Ukraine. But look how strange both nations, how that ended up for Ukraine and how that ended up being for Russia. Ukraine went on the democratic path. Russia went to the same path, the default path of having a Tsar as their leader. Deeply associates servitude as patriotism. We're seeing that Russia is easily capable of recruiting over 40,000 men per month in its military without any issues. Russians regard themselves as superior to anybody else, even if they don't have running water and running plumbing in their homes. They still think that they're superior to the average American. They never had a benevolent ruler. Name me one benevolent Russian ruler in the past 100 years. Putin, Stalin, Lenin, Nicholas II. All their leaders were atrocious. And the only decent ones were actually the Ukrainian communist leaders that somehow eventually allowed Soviet Union to be more open to the world. Khrushchev, Brezhnev, but even then they were pretty terrible. But they never had a true benevolent leader that cared about its people. Or Ivan the Terrible, for that matter. Again, another reason. Russia hasn't undergone deimperialization. They never acknowledged their wrongdoings. They never took responsibility for all the crimes that Muscovy has committed against humanity, whether it be Holodomor or, um, you know, all the massacres, the cooperation with the Nazis when World War II started, the pacts that they made with Hitler, the gulags, the millions of people that were repressed and shot by Stalin. They never acknowledged that. As a matter of fact, they're venerating Stalin and Lenin as these ultimate figures of power that brought Russia to an even greater position in the world. They never condemned their colonialism and they never condemned communism. As a matter of fact, they're still venerating communism. So I listed all the reasons why Russia is a population that will never truly change unless true reform from inside is going to occur, imposed by the West. The West needs to be absolutely involved here. Is that going to happen? I don't think so, because it seems like the West is always trying to find a half-assed solution to the end of this war. What about Chinese land Russia occupied and Russified? Yeah, that as well, right? And as a matter of fact, this could be a very interesting um, reason to convince China to stop aiding Russia. You're looking at Taiwan, but look north. You have a weakened Russian country that will definitely not be able to defend its borders if China was to decide to invade parts of these Russian lands that were in the past Chinese territories. I mean, that's the best deal they can get without even pulling up a fight. You can bet that if they were to go against Taiwan, that would be such a resource intensive war, let alone the massive destruction in the population loss that would happen as a result of this war, which is entirely possible. But here, China can go north, step in, say they're protecting Chinese populations in Russia, pull off a little green man move like Russia did back in 2014, and nobody's going to care. Rostov Oblast is flooded on sewer water. Yeah, I mean, if you go outside of the big Russian cities, you drive 100 kilometers away, you see what real Ruski Mir is. It's broken down villages, terrible infrastructure, unpaved roads, and yet Russia is claiming to be a first world nation, a developed nation, a grand nation that stands hand to hand, shoulder to shoulder by the United States. It's ridiculous. Greetings from the Netherlands. Thank you for joining, Thomas. Appreciate it. I think Russia is finished, says Paul O. Yeah, but that's going to take a while. I'm not so convinced that's going to happen very, very soon. We can only be optimistic, but Russia is resilient. I've understood very well that they can go through so much um, terrible situations. They can tolerate a lot, and it's going to take really a very bad situation in Russia for them to collapse completely. To the point where people are going to be starving. That's what it's going to take for the Russians to completely collapse as a society. But yeah, I want to talk about that. So I've talked about the Lex Friedman interview with Zelensky about the gas supplies being stopped by Ukraine to Europe, which is really important. Now let's talk a little bit about the Kursk counteroffensive that Ukraine started. Just a brief 5 minutes over it because it's very early on. We don't have a lot of details. And it seems to be right now a small counteroffensive. So it's not a massive scale counteroffensive by the Ukrainians. As far as I'm concerned, Ukraine has been able to have some small tactical gains in the last day. They've been able to take a village northeast of this occupied region in Kursk. And one interesting thing here is I've been following the Russian Telegram channels, the Voinkors, as we call them, and they were saying that Ukraine apparently deployed some new, very powerful electronic warfare systems against Russian positions and drone operators to the point that they're not able to fly these drones within 100 to 200 meters from the Ukrainian tanks. So this is very interesting because if this could be a massive advantage that Ukraine uh, can have against the Russians. It remains to be seen how effective it is, but it appears to be that Russians are complaining a lot about the fact that they're not able to fly their drones against these Ukrainian convoys. So that could be one of the reasons why Ukraine was feeling so confident at attacking these Russian positions, because we know that at this stage, 5 months in after the initial offensive started in August in Kursk of 2024, when Ukraine launched this incursion and successfully took around 800, 2,000 square kilometers, Russia's been able to bring troops forward and start their offensive of their own. So there's definitely now big Russian presence in Kursk in that area. As a matter of fact, they've also involved North Korean troops in early December in their offensive. So the very fact that Ukraine was confident enough to launch a counteroffensive in that area tells me that they have some special weapons that they didn't have previously. And that also leads me to another topic is you guys saw a week or two ago, Ukraine showcased to us in the Black Sea their new USVs, their new unmanned sea vessels, the Mahuras. And that was really interesting because, man, this is a new innovation. But these new Ukrainian sea vessels now have air defense systems or manpads that were able to shut down, I believe, two Russian helicopters or three of them. And that was really, really fascinating for me to see because the Russians now are saying that they've lost the advantage in the Black Sea. Ukraine has reestablished its dominance over the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov. So, meaning that any Russian vessels, any Russian helicopters and drones flying in that area can be easily shut down by the Ukrainian drones. As a matter of fact, in the last few days, Ukraine has also been able, apparently, to convert some of these unmanned sea vessels and allow these sea vessels to carry also drones. So now they can launch drones in the middle of the Black Sea so they can hit targets deep in the Russian rear. And as a matter of fact, Russia has lost several Panzer air defense systems in the past days because of that. So this is a new Ukraine innovation as well. You're seeing a complete kind of change of philosophy on the Ukrainian side. They're trying to really convert its military as drone dependent as possible, trying to really um, diminish human losses, right? Throwing as many men as possible on the Eastern front line and utilizing as many robots, drones as possible. Whereas Russia is doing the complete opposite because Russia has the manpower advantage, of course. So Russia doesn't care about its losses and throws thousands of men every single day on assaults throughout the front line in Ukraine. So this is kind of we're seeing this divergence of military philosophies between Ukraine and Russia. So it remains to be seen how effective that's going to be over the next few months as well. So I'll keep a close eye over the Kursk counteroffensive. I'll start making more regular video updates. We'll have some discussions about that, but hoping that Ukraine also is capable of having some good gains over the next few days. Perhaps this could be also a diversion by Ukraine, right, attacking in Kursk, and then where the Russians least expected, attack in Bryansk Oblast or somewhere in Belgorod. Albeit, these are just theories that we're modeling right now, of course. So it's nothing is 100% certain right now. And also, I think that is just part of Ukraine trying to strengthen its position over the next few months. As we know, Trump is coming in January 20th. He's going to be the president of the United States, and Ukraine needs to be on the best, strongest position possible. Even though we know that Ukraine is also backpedaling in Donbass, unfortunately, in the Pokrovsk area where it's the most difficult, where Ukraine is losing territory, unfortunately. And Ukraine cannot find a solution right now to stop the Russian advances, unfortunately, at this stage. But I'm very optimistic for this year because I know that Russia cannot be doing this endlessly. We've seen, and I've talked about Kovar Kabal's videos where he analyzing the stocks, Russian tank stocks that they have remaining throughout Russia, the reserves, and they're really running low. And the quality of these Russian tanks in these depots is dwindling day by day, and the quality is atrocious at this stage, right? You can bet that the good quality tanks that Russia was able to pull out have already been pulled out. And whatever's remaining now is just utter terrible quality tanks, right? That have been rusting away, that have been unusable for decades. And you can bet that it probably takes about 4 of these tanks to make or to refurbish one, let's say T-62 tank or T-55 on the Russian side. So for 2025, we're really going to be seeing kind of the end of Russia's ability to have these massive convoys of tanks and BMPs and MTLBs. I think that it's even being shown right now. Like they're storming Ukrainian positions with Ladas, with these bread loaf vans, with Chinese Desert Crosses, and we're seeing more and more of Russians utilizing these vehicles rather than actually armored vehicles. So that is my little points about the counteroffensive and the new technologies that Ukraine has been innovating on in the last few weeks. Okay. It could happen tomorrow down the road. Yeah, exactly. The Black Swan event can happen at any time. Look at Assad. Look at how everything collapsed so quickly for Russia. For Syria and the Bashar al-Assad regime. And I think it's definitely something that could happen to Putin. But it may take some time. It may take a year, it may take 2 years, 5 years. I don't know. The timeline here is unknown. Look at Prigozhin's mutiny. Who would have expected that he would do that? And how weak Putin looked in June 2023. During that one day of that failed mutiny, you could see the weakness of Putin. He didn't make any speech. He didn't make an address to the nation. He only did it when he felt like he was secured again, right? When Lukashenko and the power brokers like Patrushev brokered a deal between Prigozhin and Putin, then he felt safe to come out and make a speech that, everything's fine and we're strong as ever. But Putin looked very weak for that brief instant. So I can bet you that when that happens for a second time, I don't think that many people will stick with Putin anymore because he's just losing more and more influence and power by the day in Russia. Thoughts on French and British troops based in the West, Ukraine for a demilitarized zone. If you're talking about the current line between what Russia currently occupies and Ukraine, what Ukraine currently holds, then I agree on. But having French troops and British troops in Western Ukraine by Poland and Slovakia is completely useless. What good are they for there? If they're actually going to be committed to bringing troops at the actual front line that's going to be established, kind of a DMZ zone, then yeah, it's really Europe's role right now to secure this um, this line and give security guarantees to Ukraine. I understand fully that the United States doesn't want to be involved, militarily speaking. It doesn't want to send its own troops to Ukraine. I think this is Europe's job because Europe, to a certain extent, facilitated Putin's power. They believed in Putin. They invested into Putin. Several Western companies invested in Russia in the last few decades, only to see everything collapse and being taken away by Putin and his regime when 2022 occurred. Putin just took all these industries to himself. So it's really, I do agree that Europe has to walk their talk here. And it's not just going to be, oh, yeah, for sure, Ukraine, we're going to support you. Like, you need to be involved and you need to bring your own troops. And this is also about your security because you cannot allow Putin to grow strong and then eventually invade other NATO countries. And we're looking at the Baltics as well. Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania are feeling very uneasy because they're very small populations. And even if they have great militaries, a quality advantage over Russia, one thing that we cannot underestimate Russia with is their quantity of people. One thing that Russia proved is that quantity still matters. It absolutely does. And that's why Russia still has gains in eastern Ukraine because it has just an overwhelming manpower advantage over Ukraine. It can easily recruit soldiers month by month despite their losses. And worse yet, they don't care about their losses. They don't care about their dead soldiers, about their wounded soldiers. They just throw them back, right? This is the meat wave mentality that Russia's adopted. It's a one-way ticket for everybody. You're not expected to come back. And if you come back, we'll send you back to the front line because we don't want you to survive. For most of Russian soldiers, that's the reality. And so that's scary because when we have a Western world that cares about, and rightfully so, we should be caring about lives. We should be preserving life. We should be, building a better future for future generations. Russia doesn't see it that way. And when Russia, let's say, would invade Estonia or Latvia or Poland through Kaliningrad and Belarus, that's the massive advantage that they're still going to have. It's just throwing meat waves after meat waves and not caring about how many dead there are because they're fighting for Russia's greatness. За родину, as they say, for motherland, while not even understand what they're fighting for. That's really the Russian mentality as well. We call it humanity, exactly, right? We are part of a system. The Western world is part of a system that cares about preserving life. It's imperfect, but at the very core value of Europe, of North America, these Western countries, that we are trying to preserve lives, right? We take crimes seriously. We take, the killing of innocent people seriously. Russia doesn't care. Russia's fully fine in recruiting, terrible prisoners, rapists, pedophiles, and send them to the meat wave. And you can only imagine what these Russian criminals are doing to the local population in occupied Ukrainian territories. The stories that are going to come out at the end of this war are going to be very, very hurtful and heart-wrenching, unfortunately, of all the crimes that Russia has committed and is going to commit as well. Putin isn't very sharp. Well, he hasn't been sharp in the last 10 years, to say the least, by starting a fight with a nation that he should not have started. 2010s, 2020s, the rise of the snake oil peddlers. It is crazy. Yeah, I agree with you, Surfer. And that was Europe's role here. The previous European administrations of Angela Merkel, who was the French Sarkozy, and then it was, I forgot after Sarkozy who it was, but all these very foolish European leaders that bet on Russia, thinking that somehow we're going to convert Russia into a democracy, that if just we invest enough capital in Russia, this foolish belief that capitalism will convert communist countries or authoritarian countries to democracies. That didn't happen. That experiment failed. And, we are going to see the consequences of that with China as well. If China goes ahead with an invasion of Taiwan, while all of our businesses are tied with Russia, Chinese manufacturing in Shenzhen and all these other provinces in China. They're making all this stuff that we need in the West. A huge mistake. We should be more self sufficient and work only with countries that are allied with our core values of the West: democracy, freedom of speech, preserving life, working together. You know, like we shouldn't be cooperating with nations that are disregarding these values. And that is the biggest mistake that we've done over the last few decades, is believing that somehow these authoritative nations are going to be converted because we've invested enough money into them. So that brings me to a more domestic topic, and I think my Canadian viewers are going to be happy at hearing or kind of hearing about my opinions about this. But Trudeau's resignation, this is a big news that is going around today, and Trudeau announced today that he's going to be resigning from leadership. And what are my opinions about that? I'm not a Trudeau supporter. As a matter of fact, I think in the last few years, Trudeau has really shown that he is not a good leader, and he has really, I think, been a train wreck for Canada in the last few years. The writing was on the wall. What really set it off, for those that might not know, is that the finance minister last month, Chrystia Freeland, resigned the day of that she was supposed to have an economic statement, basically announcing that there would be a massive deficit that Canada would be running for like the fourth or fifth straight year. And as a matter of fact, why she resigned was because Trudeau said that I'm going to replace you after this economic statement, that you're no longer going to be the finance minister, but can you just please do me one last favor and do this economic statement, take all the blame, all the hate that we're running a deficit, and then bye bye. And you can bet that anybody that would be told that would definitely say, you know what, screw you, I'm resigning. And what makes it worse is that Chrystia Freeland is not anybody. She was the biggest backer of Justin Trudeau. She was with him through and through for the last 5-7 years, always supporting him, always defending him, and any mention of criticism of Justin Trudeau, only to see Justin Trudeau throw her under the bus like that. And it's not the only person that Justin Trudeau threw under the bus. He's done that to plenty of other ministers and other important people within the Liberal Party. So this is a disaster because we know Trump is threatening Canada right now with 25% tariffs, and he smells blood in the water. Gosh, this is such a terrible moment for Canada. And Trudeau is literally putting Canada at a precarious position because he's not announcing an election. He's announcing a resignation once the Liberal Party finds a substitute. And then there's going to be an election and there's going to be prorogation, meaning that he's putting Parliament on pause. And only in March, April, there's going to be an election in Canada. So it's basically putting the Canadian government on life support, and Trump can do whatever he wants with Canada because there's no unity. There's no true leader in Canada anymore. Like, Trudeau is not a credible leader anymore. Nobody will take him seriously. And this demise is really the direct result of him living in his own bubble. And I think Trudeau is by far, and I'm mentioning it here, and I do believe it, the worst prime minister in Canadian history. He has run the country, unfortunately, to the ground. And I'm still a very proud Canadian, and I do believe that we will be able to turn things around. But he has made things extremely difficult in the last 10 years. And for that, I think that he does deserve the label of the worst prime minister in Canadian history. And he, as you said here, level 70, it's outrageous. Country before party. It's exactly what he did. He does not care about the Canadian people. If he did, he would have announced an election right now, and he would have cared about putting Canada at the strongest position for the eventual negotiations with the Trump administration. And he did not do that. And he still cares about his image more than anything else. And all the people that supported him, that prepped him up, he threw them under the bus, where he claims himself to be the biggest feminist of them all. Look at the amount of female ministers, and other influential liberal females that he threw under the bus, fired, that forced them to resign. The list is very long. and Trudeau is a fake narcissist. So unfortunately, this is bittersweet for us because you know we're going to have a very dysfunctional government in Canada for the next few months. But I still have a lot of hope. I'm a Canadian, and I do believe that we're going to turn things around. But it's going to be a very, very long time before things are stabilized in Canada. But I just need to talk about it because do have a Canadian audience here, and it really hurts me to see how the Trudeau government really destroyed Canada in the last 10 years of their leadership. Housing crisis, home prices have doubled, tripled in certain cities. To my greater Toronto area people, you can attest to that, how homes have become so unaffordable in the greater Toronto area. Homes in Toronto now, 1 million plus minimum. You will not find a home below 1 million. Immigration levels through the roof. Yes, Canada is a country that depends on immigration. I come from a family that immigrated from Ukraine to Canada, but they need to be, this immigration needs to be capped. We need to make sure that the people that are coming to Canada are people that are actually going to provide value to our society. They're not going to be a burden. And by allowing millions of immigrants not being checked, you're putting down and you're putting a tremendous strain on the system as well. The healthcare system in Canada is breaking apart right now. Like in any province, it's panic mode because we don't have enough nurses, enough staff, enough doctors. Like everything is really breaking apart. And of course, healthcare is a provincial matter as well, but it also is a federal matter when you're bringing in millions of immigrants to Canada in the last 2-3 years. It's unsustainable. The infrastructure cannot sustain that, and the institutions cannot sustain that. More thefts, more crimes. It's really pathetic and so predictable. These were things that were said to the Trudeau government from day one when they implemented this new immigration policy, and they didn't listen. They didn't listen. They just lived in their own bubble. So, worst prime minister ever, and I will be looking forward for Trudeau to resign and see the Liberal Party collapse, because they will collapse. The Liberal Party will lose, in my opinion, official party status. Nobody's going to be voting for them, very few. And it's going to be collapse of the Conservative Party of the 90s with Kim Campbell when she took leadership for a few months, and then the Conservatives just completely collapse afterwards. And it's going to be the same for the Liberal Party this time. And things that were so predictable, for the Trudeau government, and yet they still stepped and still went ahead with this belief that our policies are the best, and they gaslighted the Canadians and made them feel like it's your fault. You don't understand that we're doing good here for you. Let me read some of your comments. I think Harper was not good enough since he made us lose UNC back then for take coffee at Tim Hortons. I'm not really sure here. I know Stephen Harper was not popular when he lost the elections in 2015, but I mean, it's night and day. Stephen Harper at this stage, I mean, I think many Canadians do miss him as much as I remember the times where people were like hoping for him to step aside. I still think that one thing that Stephen Harper was good with is being fiscally prudent. We need to be fiscally prudent. The most important thing is about the finances, a country not running deficits for years and years and years. And this is what Trudeau has been doing, spending money like, it's growing on trees. And Stephen Harper was good with being fiscally prudent. He was an economist and he was good at that. But yeah, there were many unpopular things that Stephen Harper did. And I do remember that period of time where Canadians started really disliking and hating Stephen Harper. But he doesn't compare to Justin Trudeau and his disastrous reign over the last 10 years. That said, I'm from the United States and I want a strong Canada. Thank you, Robert. And again, Trump is smelling the blood in the water. Like he's literally the last few weeks, claiming Canada should become the 51st state of the United States. Like, yeah, right. I am completely against that, of course. I want Canada to be free and sovereign. And it's scary that he's using these kind of imperialistic talk. Like, haha, Trump, you're funny, right? But it's scary because what if, right? It's not the first country that he has threatened with that. Greenland, Panama. Which other countries Putin, Trump, going to be claiming as part of the United States next? And so I think that this is also very scary because right now we don't have a functional government in Canada. We have a Trump that is at his strongest position ever. And we have this complete, chaotic situation in Canada. It's really, really bad. I really want to put the emphasis here that it's really bad for Canada, and we need to figure things out as quickly as possible this year to diminish the damage that can be incurred by Trump and his administration. We had a robust economic growth under Harper. He just wasn't likable. Yeah, it's part of that. Trudeau was very likable in his early reign, but Harper didn't have that type of likability from the Canadians. Army's lame since Harper. Well, the Canadian military has always been lame since pretty much the Cold War. Canada has been trading decade by decade its military and its sovereignty, military sovereignty. When the Cold War occurred, every subsequent US administration really forced Canada to be more and more dependent on the United States rather than having its own robust military and its military industrial complex. Canada was respected after the World War II and World War One. It was innovating in so many sectors, developing its own aviation industry. And now we're trading away bit by bit our sovereignty to the United States, right? And that's scary because the differentiating factor between the United States and Canada isn't that much anymore, right? We're so dependent on the United States. And I don't want that to be the case. And Trump is really showcasing to us, Canadians, what we need to do. We need to become more self sufficient because we can no longer rely on the goodwill of the American administration, like Biden, doing things all right and having good relations with Canada. Like, we cannot rely on that anymore. We need to be self sufficient and care about our own independence and strength. So that was my little talk about Trudeau's resignation, my complete disappointment, and on the Liberals and how they've handled things in the last few years. I don't really talk about it, but I think it's really important because, in the context of support for Ukraine, I'll say one thing is that at least Trudeau was supportive of Ukraine, and for that, I do give him credit. But I think that any other party in Canada, whether it be the Conservative Party, the NDP, or other parties, they would do the same. I don't think that the Conservative Party is going to stop supporting Ukraine because the Conservative voters, many of them are Ukrainians. The backers are many Ukrainians from the prairies, from Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and many of them are Polish, Ukrainians, Eastern Europeans, and they do care about the Ukraine issue. And they will let themselves know if the Conservative Party under Pierre Poilievre are going to decide to stop supporting Ukraine. That is going to really hurt the conservative support. So I don't think that's going to happen. So I don't think it's bad news for Ukrainian support if, let's say, the Conservative Party is going to win the elections this spring in Canada. Let me read some of your comments here. Oh, sir, R3 Curry, sure he could make a difference. The conservative base is in Western Canada. Lots of Ukrainians and other Slavs. Yeah, many Ukrainians. I think there's about 1 million plus Ukrainians or Canadians with Ukrainian descent in the prairies. That is Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta. So there's a very big conservative backing there. And they do care about the Ukraine issue, as I've mentioned. So they do not want to see a party that will simply abandon Ukraine. But again, Canada doesn't have much to offer to Ukraine, right? We can give financial packages, but Canada's military has been gutted. And unfortunately, many Canadian soldiers that are currently serving in the military can tell you how bad things are in the military, right? We're so dysfunctional, even in our in buying boots for a military. Nobody can even figure out how to do that. Decent winter boots for the Canadian military. That's how bad things are. But I'm hopeful, and I do believe that we have a strong spirit in Canada and we will turn things around. I am very, very optimistic about that. But first, we need to elect a decent government that cares about the Canadians and not about their image. And I'm very optimistic and hopeful that uh, either it be the Conservative Party uh, or another party, although I don't put much faith in the NDP, will do that. But likely it's going to be the Conservative Party that's going to be the next majority party in Canada. Now, one last thing before I end this stream. Thank you guys for sticking. But my outlook for 2025 for Ukraine and the war is going to be a very brief outlook. I'm not going to talk too much about it. And I'm not going to give any predictions as to what's going to happen because that's just utterly dumb and it wouldn't be respectful and appropriate to do that. Predictions, are always meant to fail eventually. But what I believe is going to happen, and one comment about 2024 is probably 2024 was the peak of Russia's strength. Russia had everything going for itself last year when Ukraine, for the first half, was really in its worst position yet. Remember how the GOP was blocking the assistance to Ukraine, how Ukraine lacked ammunition, lacked of everything, manpower. Things were going really bad. And the mood within Ukraine the first half was really gloomy and doomy. And thankfully, Ukraine went through that. And the worst case scenarios that were being discussed in the West, that Ukraine is going to lose this war in 2024, that Russia is going to storm through Donbass and Donetsk and Luhansk, and they're going to pull off great offensives. And Ukraine, despite the challenges, was able to hold on, was able to, right now, not allow the Russians to break through in Pokrovsk, in Chasiv Yar, in the Bakhmut area, in Bilohirivka area, in Kharkiv as well. To me, that is a huge accomplishment by the Ukrainians. And so I believe that 2025 is where the pendulum swings into Ukraine's advantage, where there is going to be a reversal of narratives, where now 2025 will be a time where Russia is going to experience tremendous challenges, tremendous difficulties. In December alone, guys, just a month ago, barely a month ago, a few weeks ago, Assad regime collapses. The Russian economy in trouble with the ruble value collapsing in a matter of a few days. Of course, Russia stabilized the situation by stopping the currency exchanges, but the value of the Russian ruble to the USD went from like 95 or 98 to 120 or 125 to the American dollar in a matter of a few days. Also, the civilian aircraft that unfortunately was shut down by the Russian air defense system on Christmas Day. And guess what happened right after? The president of Azerbaijan pointed directly the finger at Putin and said, "This is Russia's fault. We know it's you, and we expect apologies and compensation." Do you really think that Azerbaijan will pull off this move 5 years ago, before the war started, the full-scale invasion started in Ukraine? Absolutely not, because they know how weak Russia is, that they can play this geopolitical game with Russia and putting Russia on a weakened position, on an embarrassing position, that we know it's you, just admit it and pay us and pay compensation to the families and the people that were impacted by this civilian airline that you shut down. So many black swan events happened in less than a month for Russia, along with, of course, the North Koreans being used in Kursk and miserably failing at retaking territory in Kursk as well. That all happened in December. So I'm expecting a multiplication of black swan events for Russia in 2025. Additionally, with spring, we've seen last year how so many dams started breaking apart and massive cities were flooded as a result of that. Expect more of that because you can bet that Putin is not investing any of the extra funds that he's earning into restoring infrastructure, maintaining it. Everything's going to the military. So expect more, uh, you know, basically environmental disasters in Russia, floods like you've never seen before in Russia, and human-made disasters. Just again, another black swan event. I forgot to mention the oil tankers. A few weeks ago, 3 of them sunk in the Sea of Azov, creating a massive environmental catastrophe in the Sea of Azov, Crimea, and the Caucasus. We can laugh, but this is a huge environmental disaster for the world. Uh, Thousands of tons of oil were spilled on the shores of Crimea, of the Caucasus. That's another black swan event for Russia. So I think that there's going to be multiplication of those in 2025, and that's going to be a very big task for Putin. I don't think he's going to be able to go through that for another year. I really don't believe it. He could, but with great difficulty, and it's going to weaken Russia even more. Anybody anticipating Russia to be able to hold out for much longer, I think you're really wrong here, because it's impossible to hold out with this type of intensity, with Russia just putting everything on Ukraine, throwing everything they can in Ukraine, and not, stabilizing the internal situation. Something will have to give eventually, and I think 2025 will really showcase that. So you guys can let me know how much time you give to Russia before you're expecting a collapse. I'm eager to hear your opinion here in the comment section. Okay, let me read some of your comments. King Raccoon, sorry, got here too late. No notification. Thank you for coming and joining our session here, our live stream. Catching the end, I see. I'll rewatch. Thanks, Chris. Thanks for tuning in, Cinnamon. Canada, the greatest country, one of the greatest countries. Let's just say that there's many great countries, including the United States, many European nations, and Puerto Rico, where Sir Fidesz is from. Well, part of the United States, of course, it's a territory, but I need to go visit Puerto Rico as well. 2025, рік відплати, indeed. The year where Ukraine will continue. And additionally, one thing that's not going to help is Ukraine is going to be is a catalyzer. Ukraine continues to develop and innovate in its military. Ukraine has more long-range strike capabilities, new long-range drones, ballistic missiles being produced. You've seen a few weeks ago, I just literally talked about it, the USVs, the unmanned sea vessels, they're now able of shutting down Russian helicopters in the Black Sea. Like, Ukraine is innovating there. And this is also diminishing Russia's power by a lot. Darren, Ukrainians could form a group to hold their culture and send people back. I'm not sure what you mean here. I gave Russia 6 months. It's possible. It could be half a year. Again, the timeline here is completely unknown. But really, in 6 months, if there's no negotiations between Ukraine and Russia, Russia's still playing this game of, oh yeah, we're kind of ready, but not entirely. Just give us some more time, or talking yet with the language of ultimatums, like, we only are going to go on the negotiating table if Ukraine gives up Zaporizhia, Kherson, Donetsk, and Luhansk, and decides to never join NATO and never be part of the European Union. If they decide to go with that route, which seems to be the case right now, Putin's still going with the maximalist position. In 6 months, I think the situation is going to be really bad for him if he decides that I'm going all into Ukraine. I do believe, because right now he's doing that because he has optimism that he can still break through Ukraine, that just a little bit more, and I'm going to break the Ukraine spirit. Yeah, right. You've been trying to do that for the last 2 years. He also knows that a full pause of the conflict is going to be disaster for Russia. So both scenarios where Russia continues fighting, continues with the same pressure, or Russia that is stopped, is forced to stop, is equally a bad scenario for Putin, because he knows that the Russians are not going to forgive him. So what? We're only getting like 20% of Ukraine for 800,000 casualties plus. Likely it's going to be a million by within 3 months. 1 million Russian casualties. Our entire military destroyed. Our economy falling apart. Millions of people fled Russia. At what price did we take this 20% of Ukraine? and Putin is going to be hanged by his own oligarchs, the only elites that are currently supporting him. All food and drinks on me, Chris. Just let me know when to pick you up at the airport. All right, sounds good. Do the natives outnumber the Russians where the radar is located? Not sure what you mean here, Darren, but I believe that one thing as well, speaking of Russian collapse, is that there's a lot of ethnic minorities in Russia. And the powder keg of Russia is the Caucasus. And you can bet that Kadyrov right now, as soon as he smells blood in the water, as soon as he smells Putin's weakness, he's going to try to take Chechnya for himself. That could be one of the scenarios as well, where why hasn't been Kadyrov sending his Kadyrovites to the front line fighting the Ukrainians? He's preserving them, he's saving them, and he has his own kind of military, private military. He could literally just say, "Screw you, Putin. I have my own Chechnya now." And that's one thing that Zelensky talked about in the interview with Lex, is that have the Chechens forgotten how brutal Putin was during the Chechen wars in the 90s? How Russia committed some of the worst atrocities against the Chechen people in the first and the second Chechen war? All the false flag events that he started just to have a casus belli at attacking Chechnya a second time? We forgot about that. But the Chechens, I think many of them haven't forgotten. And so either it's Kadyrov or some other Chechen rebels. That could be a very, very big powder keg for Russia that could kickstart a chain of events of other ethnic minorities, the Buryats, the Tuvans, other ethnic minorities in Russia to claim their own independence as soon as they feel like Russia has no more control. Kind of a chain of events that we saw during the breakup of the Soviet Union. That could entirely happen over the next few years as well. And what is Russia going to do? Send a few hundred men to stabilize the situation against millions of people? I doubt it. Russia's losing 1,000 plus troops per day. In 6 months, that's 200,000 plus tanking, telling you 6 months. Okay, Albert, let's see if in 6 months that's going to happen. It's optimistic, I know, but again, you could be right here. There is no wrong answer. Could be in a month, could be in a year. But I really do believe that for my outlook for 2025 is that the situation has reversed to Ukraine's advantage, in my opinion. Yes, Ukraine is losing territory. You guys, I think you're appreciating my videos because I'm not trying to sugarcoat things. I'm not trying to tell you that everything is great. Ukraine is losing territory. But one thing I know is that Ukraine is not going to stop fighting. As long as there is support from the West, military support, Ukrainians know what is at stake here. It's an existential question. When you're fighting for your life, for your future generations, there's no greater motivation than that. Yes, there's less and less Ukrainian people. Many are dying on the Ukrainian side every single day, unfortunately. But the Ukrainians are not going to stop. They've lived through some of the worst disasters. The biggest one was Holodomor, the genocide that was committed by Stalin, which killed at least 3 million people, at least in the 1930s. An artificial genocide, a famine that was created by Stalin. And Ukraine still stands to this day, even with millions of people, unfortunately, wiped out and erased by this brutal man and regime. The Ukrainians are still standing. The historic and cultural identity has been preserved by the Ukrainians. And that leads me to say as well, thinking back when I was younger, my parents always talked negatively about the Russians, and I always wonder why do they don't like the Russians so much, right? And it explains itself. Like this has been transferred on from generations to generations to never trust Russians. The Ukrainians knew that. We just foolishly believed for a brief period of time that we could make a deal with them. Maybe this time they've changed after the breakup of the Soviet Union. That maybe this time the Russians are going to be, humane. They're going to be fighting for their rights. They're going to be more democratic. Boy, were we wrong. And I understand completely why my parents and their great parents were so anti-Russian. Thank God they were saying I wasn't born a Russian. Дякую Боже, що я не москаль, as they would say. And I would always wonder, why would they say that? Why would they say, thank God I'm not Russian, right? What's so wrong? What's wrong with being Russian? They seem to be sort of similar to us. And now I completely understand. I'm super grateful that I am not a Russian, and I am Ukrainian, and you guys as well. Even though you're not Ukrainian, you embody the Ukraine spirit by you supporting the Ukrainians and supporting my channel, other pro-Ukrainian channels. You're also voices of pro-Ukraine opinion out there when you're speaking with family, with colleagues at work, with friends. Providing that pro-Ukrainian narrative is extremely important. So you guys also embody that spirit. So thank you for your support. Without you, God knows where Ukraine would be right now. You multiply every single one of you by millions of others, and you can see what type of impact that has on Ukraine's ability to defend itself against a brutal Russian horde right now that becomes more and more brutal day by day as Ukraine continues to defend itself. Вподобайка і коментар на підтримку каналу. Дуже дякую. So Surferdes says, please like and subscribe to my channel. I know I've lost some subscribers because for the last 2 weeks I have not been uploading. I've been on a much needed break, end of year break. It was really important for me to take some time to recharge my batteries. And so I hope you guys understand that. But now I'm back recharged, and I've said it in the beginning of the stream, but I'm planning on doing monthly live streams now. I want to do this by month, and perhaps in the future have other guests show up, other commentators show up in the live streams, or maybe me joining other live streamers. So I'll try to set that up. But my main resolution for this year for this channel, and I have another announcement I want to make as well, is I want to be doing monthly live streams, having more interactions with you guys. And of course, more regular videos as well. So it was really important for me to recharge and being able to do that. But the other announcement is that I'm going to be also creating a new YouTube channel completely unrelated on the topic of the Russia-Ukrainian war. And I'll give you more details over the next few months, but I'm going to be creating a separate channel where I'm going to be filming videos about do-it-yourself projects and construction projects that I have, because I have a passion for building things. I love building stuff, repairing things, and so I want to be uploading, making content and uploading it on YouTube and sharing that with you guys. So you can let me know if you're interested about it. But I'm going to create a new channel, and I'm going to be sharing more details about it over the next few months. So you guys can let me know in the comment section if you're interested about that. But I'll be sharing more details with all my different projects, and I have so many of them, like building a balcony cover to replacing, asphalt shingle roof, to things like that. I think would be really useful to any do-it-yourself type of people, especially in the current context where everything is so expensive, right? Like finding a contractor, general contractor, or handyman is almost impossible in Canada. And if you do find one that is reliable, he's going to charge you, or they're going to charge you through the roof. And so that really forced me in the last few years, being a homeowner, to taking things into my own hands. And I've always had a very construction oriented, like I always loved construction, and I always loved building things with my hands. So that's why I thought, I also want to start having a plan B with YouTube. I also want to start making content that I'm passionate about other than just the Russian-Ukrainian war, because we know as well that this war is not going to last forever. And we know that, eventually I want to divert to other topics other than just talking about the war in Ukraine. It's going to end one day for sure. Tom Bruno, saunas. And yes, maybe how to make a sauna, how to build a sauna. But I have many projects for this year, and so I hope you guys are going to be joining me for that new journey with my new YouTube channel that I'm going to be creating. But at the same time, I'm going to continue making videos on this channel. This is not to say that I'm going to stop making videos on this channel either. I'm going to do both. But I do have a sense. I have a sense that this year is going to be it for Russia. I really do believe that a collapse could very well happen for Russia this year. It's inappropriate to say that with certainty, but there's something inside of me that says that if there's not an agreement, some sort of negotiation between Russia and Ukraine, that is agreed upon, that Russia's heading into full collapse, a societal collapse, and that will be very historic, the most historic moments of the 21st century. So thank you guys for joining this stream. I hope you enjoyed it. We've talked a lot. We've talked about, Russian gas transit being stopped, about Zelensky's interview with Lex, about Trudeau's resignation and what it means for Canada, my outlook for 2025, my new YouTube channel that I'm going to be starting this year, along with this channel as well, that I'm going to be continuing on. And yeah, I am going to be doing monthly live streams. So I'm very excited to continue this on. I'm very excited to continue doing my videos. I really appreciate your support. I'm looking forward to come back to come back from my short little vacation, if I may call it like that. And thank you so much for your support. And Slava Ukraini. Cheers, guys.